So we start with network state. That's the new book you've written, and it's published online. And in that, Balaji talks about how a small group of very highly aligned individuals can come together using digital tools, a common charter, and cryptocurrency to create virtual communities, and then, very interestingly, crowdfund them, sort of populate these physical nodes, and eventually canvas for recognition as a diplomatic entity. Very provocative. The book is out. It's public. It's called The Network State. Balaji also has something called the Network School, which he'll talk about.
Should I just chip in?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So the fundamental concept is we've started new companies, we've started new currencies. Can we start new cities or even new countries? And the most important kind of innovation in the world is political innovation. In a sense, for example, India's liberalization in 1991 was its second declaration of independence. Perhaps the Pokhran nuclear test was the third, right? And so being able to actually get independent and actually be able to innovate at the political level enables everything above that. The trillion-dollar economy comes from the ability to change the laws at the root level. And we're experiencing this now, for example, in the US and in the West, where there's a conflict between what I call the network and the state, between technology, between the billion-person communications networks and cryptocurrency networks and the government, the US government, which is trying to tax or regulate the tech billionaires out of existence, as the tech billionaires are doing free speech and free markets online and on chain. And the conflict between these two can be resolved in many different ways. But one way it can be resolved is if the tech founders figure out ways to actually merge the network with the state, as is what is happening, for example, in El Salvador or in Argentina, where there are states that have actually managed to cultivate tech founders and bring them in from around the world. I think Prime Minister Modi is being very good about this in terms of reaching out to the Indian diaspora and the Indian network around the world, all the Indian tech CEOs. That's another version of this. But the most interesting version to me, or the newest, is the concept of actually being able to found not just a company, but a country or a city. And you do this by taking your large online community, you start gathering them in one place, and you gather them in many places. And the sum of that population, income, and real estate footprint could be larger than that of a legacy nation state. It's like a social network, but it owns territory. And so that's a concept.
Yeah. Yep. So Balaji, before you go to network school, so do you think it's possible that, say, a bunch of like well-meaning Indians like collect together and they figure out a country where you can kind of, say Bulgaria, it's depopulating, right? 7 million people depopulating, doesn't have great weather. And is it possible to kind of buy into, is that the vision, so to say?
So all right, answer partly. Right now, I think, and maybe there's people in the room who think this is obvious, maybe there's people who disagree with me. I do believe the world is on the verge of, if not in the middle of, a sovereign debt crisis. And, for example, it's going on in Japan and the UK and Canada. Many of these economies are either melting down, on the verge of melting down, and that'll eventually come back to the US. And that's because there's two ways of exiting that, either a huge print of money, which is a more likely scenario, or rates remain high and a bunch of banks and commercial real estate firms and so on start dying. And at the end stage of that, I think there will be a lot of land for sale. You're already seeing this in the US, where many properties in big cities are going for cents on the dollar in San Francisco and other places. And in the event that something like that happens, similar to the 2008 crash, but tougher, there will be a lot of land for sale. And then on top of that, there's a depopulation thing that you mentioned. I think Japan in particular has Akiya and Inada, which are types of homes that are in the middle of rural Japan that are just unpopulated because their population has crashed. And so there's large, and then you combine that with Starlink, you combine that with remote work, you combine that with cryptocurrency. If you are mobile, you can group with your people in the cloud and then move to new spots on the land and essentially reopen the frontier of the 1800s, but rather than in one place offline, it's online and all around the world.
Yeah, interesting. So we're going to keep moving, and we're going to move to India,
Sure.
which is something you've written about. You wrote this fantastic tweet called "Investing in India is Improving India," which the Prime Minister himself co-tweeted, etc. So now India is a leapfrog nation, which is like a term I use, and you've also spoken about India as a civilizational entity, an ancient civilization, and also the startup nation, right? 1991 is when we kind of became that. So it's a young startup nation. And sort of this term that we use, Blume publishes a report called the Indus Valley Report, where you kind of bring these two together, the Indus Valley civilization and Indus Valley as in Silicon Valley. So my question to you is, you've been such a bull, such an optimist on India, right? And what, according to you, are the next 1, 2, 3 steps that India needs to take to sort of hit product market fit as a startup nation?
Sure. So I am moderately optimistic on India and extremely optimistic on Indians. And what I mean by that is I think the Indian state has done a good job over the last several years, but it's difficult to manage 1 billion plus people and so on. But if you combine that with the Indian diaspora and the Indian network, that's actually a very formidable thing. So I'm extremely bullish on the Indian network, of which the Indian state is a subset. And what's the Indian network? Well, that's, for example, all of the technological, but also political, finance, media figures that have arisen now in the West, but globally. And with the advent of Reliance Jio, 1 billion Indians are now actually full internet citizens. They can actually sign smart contracts, they can communicate, they can transact with anybody else online. And that's actually the total opposite of what happened with China, right? India and China actually, if China has a totally closed off network, a Galapagos Islands, an ecosystem all to their own, India's network, its key characteristic is it's integrated with the rest of the English-speaking world and really the rest of the world. And so the emergence of that will be completely different. And so I'm very bullish on anything that is internet first within India, where it's just essentially developed with the idea that you're an internet Indian and you're global and you have an international perspective.
Yeah, so Balaji, one question. So we've got the Indians sort of doing really well, right? And but why aren't the Indian companies, like for example, China has got the opposite. They've got the Sheins, the TikToks, the Alibabas. But where's the big Indian Decacon or like Centicon, which is kind of well known out there? Australia's got Canva, for instance. What's holding us back? It's not lack of capital.
I mean, the flip answer is you've got Google and Microsoft. But the the deeper answer is that, and you can make excuses and so on. So I'll give the excuse version, and then I'll give some other versions, right? The excuse version is 1978, Deng Xiaoping did reform and opening up in China, and it took 13 more years for India to go capitalist. And so there's roughly a 10-year lag on lots of things. India is, China with a 10-year lag, right? But so that's one argument. A second argument is, if we think about India and China and the U.S., China arguably plays the world's best home game in the sense of they've just got this massive physical build out and all this stuff. But their diaspora is kind of being pushed back overseas. In any country where China doesn't have hard power, its diaspora is often finding it harder and harder to get visas, right? Whereas India plays arguably the world's best away game. So the Indian diaspora does phenomenally well around the world. We can learn accents, we can learn languages, we can learn politics, we can operate financially, we can have 1 foot at home and 1 foot away. With the OCI card, you're an overseas citizen of India and you're a complement to the citizen of India, right? And India's, so that's a different kind of strategy, and it suggests that just like you don't want to naively copy the US, you don't necessarily want to naively copy China, India's emergence mode will be different. And I think the types of things that Indians and India will be good at will be those things that are based on this global network. So, for example, Polygon is maybe the first Indian breakout because it's not really Indian, it's on-chain, right? It's not a, go ahead.
Polygon is a very large crypto company.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's not just a crypto, it is a crypto company. Yeah. You also think of it as a crypto protocol, so it's multiple billions. Maybe the single largest Indian global breakout in the sense of something that somebody in France or Argentina or Mexico would use without thinking of it as Indian would be something like that, Polygon.
Right? I get you. All right, let's get a little bit to, because given the audience area, AI and India. There was this recent article in Bloomberg which talked about how Philippines, there's like shivers going down all the KPOs and the ITS companies because of AI. How big is this likely to be? How fast is this animal moving? And how should all the CEOs of ITS companies, the Wipros and the Infosys be worried?
No, I think, so AI is, so one way to think about it is amplified intelligence, also Indians, okay, yeah. Right? So AI is very, very good for India, extremely good for India, and here's why. There's both the digital white collar and digital blue collar aspect of things. So digital blue collar, with these, on the order of 1 billion Android phones that are being distributed, there is a pressing hunger for training data, right? That is to say, for example, if you look at AI image generators, the hands are often off, right? Why is that? Because we're very sensitive to how hands look and different postures of hands. There isn't the training data. So you can imagine someone with their phone and they're being told, take a photo of your hand like this, like this, like this, like this, right? And there's so much that can be collected in terms of training data that we've actually hit the limits of what the open internet would give us, okay? So essentially just for those who don't know, the last 10, 20, 30 years of message boards and social media, all that data was used to train AI. But that data was not built to train AI. That's to say, it was just random comments, it was random posts on social media. It wasn't meant to train the algorithm, right? If you generate data that is meant to train the algorithm, it looks quite different. And so digital blue-collar work will be data that is meant to train AI. For example, walking around with a phone might allow the AI to learn how motion works or things of that nature, okay? So digital blue-collar will be a big thing, and all of these phones, one thing I do think about is anywhere there's a phone, there's a job. You can earn cryptocurrency for training AI, okay? So that's something you could do with a huge swath of Indians potentially. On the other end of the spectrum, the complete meltdown of American media means that AI has opened up essentially a once-in-a-century opportunity. Do you know how Hollywood was actually started? No. Okay, so there's a great book called, by Neil Gabler called An Empire of Their Own. And essentially Edison had all the patents in New Jersey for motion picture production. And so a group of immigrants went all the way out to Los Angeles, and it was good for scenery in terms of, you know, deserts and mountains and beaches and stuff, but also good for patents because Edison, it was
so
a painful,
far away from New Jersey.
It was so far away, exactly. Yeah. So they built this nascent motion picture industry, and they fought Edison on lawsuits and stuff, and that's how Hollywood was born, okay? Now, India can do something similar. Why? We already have generic drugs, right? Essentially for years, India, whether you call it ignoring patents, whether you call it essentially not recognizing how much of their legitimacy, it's because of that India has the generic drug and biotech industry that it does. And that's why India was able to have its own vaccine during COVID and has its own burgeoning pharma and biotech industry. So India has an opportunity to do the same with AI, call it generic AI, where it simply doesn't recognize copyright and all this copyright infringement that the rest of the world will be doing, rather than having, I don't know the exact number, it's like 80 or 90 year copyright that Disney and others lobby for. India says, actually, no, we're gonna give you 5-year copyright and that's it. And everybody from around the world, come and train your models in India, okay? Why? Because that'll give a huge boost. India is a big and strong enough country that it can make the financial case. It can also make the moral case. You'll get lots and lots of developers, lots of engineers that will rally to come here and do that. And you just basically budget for the political battle in, the World Trade Organization, whatever court it is, there'll be a zillion patent fights back and forth. It'll be just like early Hollywood, right? Yeah. Because what'll happen is you'll make the money from essentially truly open AI, open source AI, and you'll have the industry here, you'll be able to fight the suits, and eventually you'll win.
Very interesting. Patent temporal asymmetry, or whatever you want to call it, like
right.
leverage. Yeah.
And so, this gets back to my earlier point of legal innovation.
Yeah.
Is actually the cheapest innovation. A lot of people, governments, for example, they think they need to do subsidies to bring in tech guys and so on and so forth. Actually, the greatest subsidy is the one that doesn't cost anything at all, which you take some old antiquated regulation, you put a line through it.
Yeah.
Okay. So, for example, drones or 3D printing, just allow that to happen. In this case, you just disallow old copyright. You allow people to train on Disney movies. You essentially say public domain is much earlier than people think. That would change everything.
Yeah. All right, Balaji. On India, last question. So got you here. Are there anything that's disappointed you about India? Like, candidly, like the Bitcoin ban, for instance. I know you kind of wrote about it.
They didn't ban it. They did. So I do think. So on cryptocurrency, right? Yeah. So everybody here probably has WhatsApp, and in WhatsApp you have a group chat. In that group chat you have domestic Indian numbers, and you also have international numbers. And you're able to transparently, easily, without thinking about whether somebody is, in the US or in India, or has a US number, has an Indian number, you can just talk back and forth and it's fine and it's easy, right? In the same way, like, the rupee is fine for domestic transactions, but what currency will Indians use abroad? It's going to end up being, in the fullness of time, cryptocurrency. Because cryptocurrency is a neutral rail, it's good for international transactions. A smart contract can be signed by a Brazilian, a Japanese, an Indian, an American, and you have a neutral court that arbitrates it. And US judges or Chinese courts can't freeze those funds. So abroad, India and Indians are stronger with cryptocurrency And at home, for sure, use a rupee, it's fine, right? But just like you have domestic and international communications in WhatsApp, you have domestic and international transactions with the rupee and cryptocurrency, and they're complementary to each other. So I'm somewhat, the only thing I'm a little disappointed in is people framing cryptocurrency as it's anti-sovereignty or something like that. It actually enhances India's sovereignty because it's not being the number one or the number two globally. It can be the number three. It can pursue open source. So rather than have the dollar versus the renminbi, India can have the rupee domestically, and it can have cryptocurrency globally, and it can be stronger, it can be accepted everywhere, and it can be not blocked anywhere.
Intriguing. I haven't heard that answer. Yeah.
Great.
So last question, and to give you the complete range of Balaji's interests, etc. Transhumanism, eternal life. Balaji's spoken about that. There's a lot of research going on. The Overton window on that has shifted. David Sinclair, all of that. So just to kind of get your perspective, and we'll try and keep it a little sort of like life advice from you,
Sure.
What is, how far are we away from living to 120? Okay, and what are the steps that folks here need to take? I'm sure everyone here wants to live forever, but yeah.
Yeah, so transhumanism, another word for talking about it is like human self-improvement. And essentially, like my friend Brian Johnson and I, we're doing something new, ns.com, and it's a network school camp in, it's really a campus that we've opened up near Singapore. It's really focused on this. And one way of thinking about it is, we have all these dashboards for what's going on in Bangalore or Budapest, but not for one's own body, right? You don't actually have the metrics there. And, so now with Fitbit and with Apple Watch and so on, you have those metrics. Okay, and so how can you synthesize them? How can you develop actions on them? How can you get notifications on yourself? Again, starting to get this stuff with Apple Watch. And then the next step is, with the genetics and with biotech, we can actually modify. I mean, one way of thinking about it is, India recently at the Olympics, didn't do that great with a billion plus people, a bronze medal or, so no golds. And if you think about the biochemistry of that, one of the things that we did recently, we funded something called the Enhanced Games. And the Enhanced Games, so me, Peter Thiel, a few others, actually an Indian origin founder, said, okay, what if you actually have a totally new sport?
Yeah, I'm getting
okay.
Wrap it.
So check that out. That's actually something where it's all about transhumanism and human self-improvement. All right?
Great, Balaji, riveting. This has been interesting. Had the time of my life here. Great. Thank you.
All right, cool.
Yeah.